It was sometimes simpler on the South Park to solve a problem than to send word down below that you needed help. Like the time several miles from Pine Grove when we realized the side rod had broken because there was a little give when we went around a curve. If it wasn't fixed, it would pull the wheel out of line and we'd jump the track. I was a fireman for $129 a month and wasn't often called on to make such repairs, but if somebody didn't volunteer, we'd wait around for hours after we telegraphed for somebody to come up. Besides, you most always got credit points for the work. I crawled between the wheels and underneath the engine to take the rod off the opposite side to bring the train in. There was a pin on the wheel and a nut on the collar of the broken rod. The nut had been there so long it was beaten up. I began cutting it off with a cold chisel. The temperature was 35 degrees below zero at 9:30 a.m., and I was lying on ice and snow trying to swing a hammer in cramped quarters. I had on a denim jacket and overalls over my clothes. 15 minutes went by, then 20. "Bert, are you cold?" Al Herbert yelled now and then. I was under the engine about half an hour and didn't feel the cold until I crawled out. Then I shook all over and couldn't talk. The year 1909 was a bad one for the South Park Railroad, where snow and snowslides were concerned. We left Como at 10 a.m., April 2nd, with 2 engines and a rotary snowplow to dig out 2 engines stuck between Romley and the Alpine Tunnel. Conditions were so bad it took us all day to get to Romley. Since it was too much to fight the snow in the dark, we stayed there all night. 2 old maids and their brother ran a place at Romley where they charged 50 cents for a meal and 50 cents for a bed with 18 covers because there was no stove in the room. Ed Ennis, a big man who was engineer on the rotary, and the fireman slept on the rotary, which had a lot of room and was nice and warm because of the steam boiler. While Ed was asleep, somebody poured oil in his mouth. The next day, we took the snowplow right up to the stuck engines. The engine I was on sent us straight through the 1,771-foot-long tunnel and right down to Pitkin on the western slope. There we stayed snowbound for 7 days. On Easter Sunday, April 11th, we left Pitkin, headed back through the tunnel to Como on the eastern slope with 5 engines and 2 trains. When we got to the tunnel, 13 miles away, we sat about an hour and a half. The engineer and brakeman walked through the tunnel to see if we could get through on the other side, then telegraphed the dispatcher in Denver that there were 2 to 3 inches of ice on the rails and several feet of snow. The dispatcher said, "Go!" Fortunately, I was in the middle engine, number 73, with engineer Mike Conroy on the mixed train. We had just cleared the tunnel and found the snow to be 7 feet deep because there hadn't been any trains over the road for several days. Suddenly we were stuck. The head engine, number 64, had hit the ice. It jumped the track and slid down the mountain on its side. The snow piled in front of it, stopping it almost 150 feet down. The fireman, Guy Elliott, and engineer Fred Winter got off, but the road foreman, George Gray, went down with the engine. However, he got only a cut in his ear from an oil lamp in getting out. If we didn't show up at St. Elmo, they'd know something was the matter, so the conductor walked to the telegraph office at Alpine Depot on the west side of the tunnel to send a message to the train dispatcher for a rescue outfit with the snowplow. Turned out that we would be stranded until the following Wednesday. It was 18 days altogether before I got back to Como from that trip. We slept in the engine twice a day, walked through the tunnel to the eating room house at Alpine Station for meals. There was a combination coach in the second train, and to pass the time, I went back and played pitch. It was the following August before the snow had melted sufficiently for a crew to bring the engine back to the top. Engineer Fred Tingle used engine number 73, which I had fired on the train when we got stuck, to pull the engine up in August. As the snow had melted, the engine slipped farther and farther down the canyon until it was at the bottom, 500 feet below the tracks. There had been too much snow for it to be damaged. There wasn't even a broken window. In 1973, I was up there where the engine went off and could still see the marks where they had brought the engine up the hill. Somehow, spring always managed to arrive. The treacherous ice and snow disappeared from the tracks, and the chokeberry bushes leafed out on each side of the tracks going into Pitkin. It was right here, one time, we had this little engine going into Pitkin when the fireman sneezed and his false teeth, both uppers and lowers, fell out. He told the engineer to stop so he could pick them up. "That's your tough luck," replied Zongheim, the engineer, and the fireman had to walk back a mile to find his choppers. But no matter what the weather, there were accidents on the South Park, which was abandoned in 1910. One of the really bad wrecks happened when a train of ore ran away between Boreas and Como. Engineer Rudy Schwartz stayed with the engine and was killed, and all that was left of the engine was a naked boiler. It was true. You had to need a job and be able to take it to work on the high-altitude South Park Railroad.